Hi, you're still here, and so am I. And Trump is gone, and it's February 2021, and we're still doing theater. And tonight we're going to talk about a really exciting show that you can still see. If you're watching this before February 12th, I believe, Friday night, you can watch it for 3 more times. We have the director, the assistant director, the design people, and the cast of A Doll's House at Riverwalk part of this dialogue tonight. And I want to start by bringing on the director and assistant director. I assume that's what you called Michele, Brian Farnham and Michele Booher-Purosky. And there you are. Hello, guys.
Hi, Doug.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Your accomplishment here is, I think, just a tremendous thing for our community, our theater community. And, I had nothing to do with it, but I'm really proud of you guys for pulling that off and for us as a community for getting it going. So you came up with, I think, a really innovative idea for how to, and this whole series has been about how do we do theater now? How do we try to make theater happen? And you used Zoom. Which many of us had started to give up on. So if you could walk me through, just unmute yourself, Michele, so you can jump in whenever you want to.
I will. There's just a car horn blaring outside my house right now. So as soon as that stops, I will come back in. Brian will be able to tell you a lot right now. Thank
you. And just so you know, volume-wise, you're kind of loud there too. So when you come back on, beware of that. Yeah, I mean, selling it to Riverwalk in the first place, the A Doll's House is not like you wouldn't think, like the big thing big draw that would bring people coming. Because I love Ibsen, but just tell me about how it came to be, first of all, and then we'll get to how you figured out how to do it.
For sure. Yeah. So, Michele and I are both on the Riverwalk board of directors. So obviously, as soon as the pandemic hit, theaters all everywhere, but certainly Riverwalk being no exception to that, kind of had to shut down and jettison any idea of what we had for our season. For those of you who are familiar with Riverwalk, we tend to plan our season about a year in advance. And so it was a lot of planning and a lot of hard work had gone into choosing our 2020-2021 season. So, I guess the simplest answer would be sort of necessity, right? We had to just sort of pivot and say, what the hell can we do now? We want to provide theater. We want to serve our community in any way that we possibly can, but we have so many limitations now. So obviously there's a couple of things that became, I think, limiting factors. Certainly one of them, the biggest one, is that people really, beyond not being able to be in an audience, you really couldn't have people very much face to face at all. So obviously you're limited on what tools you can do. You can tape things and release them. You could potentially do something where you're in the same space and tape it. But realistically, Zoom was the safest and most realistic option in a very, very uncertain time. So once we sort of said, okay, we really want something that can be produced entirely virtually, we'd like the ability to pivot into something live. If the pandemic, was over in December, that would have been great. But obviously we know that didn't happen. So we really needed a show that you could do in that fashion. And there's a couple of things about A Doll's House that lend itself to doing it in this way. First of all, it's public domain, right? So being able to have something like that, you can first of all cut it, you can change it in any way that sort of fits what you're trying to do with it. So that's a lot of flexibility that you don't have with things you have to pay for. And then of course, getting streaming rights. When you have public domain things, you don't have to pay anyone to stream it. Yeah. And we ran into a lot of issues with a lot of different publishers who just hadn't caught up with, this pandemic that we found ourselves in. So, those were two of the big driving factors behind choosing this show. But the third then was, how do you do something when you can't be in the same room with one another? And as we were looking at sort of the different scripts and different things that people were passionate about, I had always kind of liked this script. I had only seen pieces of it. I'd actually never seen the show entirely through, which was interesting. But as I researched it more and was coming sort of from a forensic background, I started thinking, this show all takes place in the same space. And that is very conducive then to performing it through Zoom. You have a lot more control over that just from a spatial perspective. So those were kind of the, the ways that the planets aligned for this particular show, and just the fact that it's a damn good show.
Yeah.
The message of the show is very, very modern, and it's unfortunately something that society's still struggling with today, is how do we ensure that women actually have agency. So
and we'll get to this later, but it is a show also that has to has good actors. I mean, you cannot do this and have it be, half-assed. It's just really got to be well done. Michele, can you yeah. So how did you and Brian come to collaborate on this, and what was that partnership like? When did it start? And
wow, when did it start?
Yeah.
Back in September, probably.
Okay.
Back in September of 2020, we were physically together for a weekend. It was my 50th birthday, and a small group of friends actually got together.
Oh my God, you're 50?
I know, right?
Wow.
Hard
to believe.
And yeah, Brian was part of that group, and I think we had sort of talked about for sure wanting to do a show together again, because we hadn't done one together with these two roles since Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So I think we were both missing it, and Brian knew about this show and was interested in it and was sort of pitching it as, hey, what do you think about this? And I also was not familiar with the show. And so it was something that I read and was like, yeah, absolutely. What a good message. Very relevant still for today. So yeah, so I said, sure, let's do it.
And Brian, just talk a little bit about, I heard on the news interview that was done with Channel 10, the idea of putting the audience in the center of the room. And I think I asked you the other day about, was that somebody else's idea? Did you come up with that? How did you come up with that? And how did you realize it? I mean, are you really the genius that you seem to be here now, or what's going on?
I can't claim genius, but
Okay.
yeah, it's not an idea that I got from anyone else. It was really born of my own pet peeves, I have to say. Once we realized, we're going to be doing this on Zoom, I thought, okay, I sat down and actually physically made a list and say, what things do I not like about Zoom? I feel like so often we tend to say with a different medium, and that can be true of a space. Some people don't like doing theater outdoors. Some people don't like doing it in the barn. Some people don't like doing it at Riverwalk, whatever space you love or don't like. And instead of just saying, I don't like this, I figured, well, let's list the reasons why I don't really like Zoom as a medium. And, the number one reason was I really hate that it looks like a conference call. I hate that you feel like you're watching a Netflix special in many ways, only with lower production quality. You can't match that production quality. Right. So, at that point, I realized, when our audiences are sitting in their homes, we're not competing with the sounds and smells and crinkling gum wrappers at the theater. We're actually competing with people's Netflix accounts. We're competing with their phones, where they can they can be looking at anything, and even while they're logged on to our shows. So I figured we had to do something to make it more interesting than just sitting here watching people like we are right now. We needed to do something that was a little bit different. And also, obviously, we cannot fully mimic being in a theater. And so we had to find something that's almost a hybrid of the two. So the idea of setting the audience sort of in the middle of it lends an intimacy that I think is pretty unique. And that was the intention, at least. And it sounds like in many people's estimations, we were successful in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
But that was really the idea. One of the things that you miss when you're in a space, Riverwalk not so much, but in many spaces, you don't necessarily get that close physical intimacy with space. Right. And that's actually a benefit of doing it in this way.
I agree.
It's something that actually makes theater better. So you kind of have to say, okay, these are the weaknesses of the medium, and here are the strengths of the medium. So how do we design a show that plays to the strengths and doesn't deny the weaknesses? You're not going to be able to mimic a Hollywood production. You just can't. Right. So embrace what you can and sort of accept what you can't change.
Right. And I want to bring everybody else on in just a second, but it's like that whole, I don't know. I tried to write about that today when I put the Facebook thing on, about the idea of the audience was in it. I mean, the audience felt in it. Now I can't say it really was, because there was so much artifice going on in how you put this all together, but it didn't look like that. And this whole thing of like, this is why I'm drinking right now. This is my kombucha. I mean, it's really horrible. It's like I haven't had this before. It's lime, coconut, and something else, but it tastes like licorice. But I would pass if I was talking to Brian, I would just reach this down, and you'd have one in your space.
Yeah.
And you would pull it out, and there you are. And it's
I was gonna say, don't pass it to me. I got something.
okay. Let's see. Yeah, I gotta get the camera. Here, Michele.
Thank you. Yeah, you gotta wait till Doug puts it down.
God, you see how hard that must have been? I mean, to get that, it's amazing. Everybody else, come on the screen. All you guys.
And Doug, to that, I have to say, it's really I want to give credit to the actors for picking that up very, very quickly. When we did start actually passing props, it only took them a couple times and they were like, oh yeah, this is perfect. Some of them weren't perfect the first time they did it. It was really great.
Well, I mean, obviously that's kind of a trick, and it's fun to watch, and it doesn't distract. I mean, I was afraid those kind of things might distract from the play, but the play is really solid, and that's a tribute to all of you guys who are in it. So I just want to, because I've been there a little bit, and I just really impressed with how you stayed as actors doing this time. You didn't get distracted. Like, for example, I mean, Brian was talking about how it looks like a conference call, and like in a conference call, I mean, imagine actors working together and they can look at their own face if they want to on the screen. I mean, the compulsion is like almost impossible not to do that. Did you all face that? I mean, did you all have trouble with that, or just tell me any of you what that was like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, you're looking at yourself and whether you got the mirror image going or depends on what your settings are. I actually decided to go to rather than show how people were seeing me, I needed to see how I was moving, because when I move my right hand out to the right, I want it to mirror, because I can't think backwards. You know, when Brian says to the right or to the left or whatever, I have to see what it's looking to me. I don't know. It was confusing if I did it the other way. Turned right and saw my image turn left. It would throw me too much. So I had to turn on the mirroring. Yeah.
But even then it gets confusing. I mean, I know from trying to rehearse my play that way, I was constantly, how do we, like, where you try to do your, even touching your hair, you touch the wrong side of it, move it the wrong way.
For me, it was the view. Like, if I always had to have it on just the one person talking, and I couldn't have anybody on the top of the screen. Otherwise, I would look at each person that was talking in any given moment. And so it was such a distraction for me that I had to have, if it was just one person talking to me on the screen, it made all the difference in the world, because then I wasn't tempted to look over.
Right. But that takes a lot of discipline to do that. By the way, Matt and Amanda, come on the screen. You don't have to stay off. Just realized you weren't there.
Well, and that was interesting too. I remember, I think it was Kate and Rachel and Abbie, because we had to deal with that at one point, because when they were handing the tea back and forth, when they were drinking tea together, they actually had to be able to see Abbie hand it off, because she had no lines. And so they had to watch the other person, but also have that little banner up there to see when Abbie was handing them a glass.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny how those things, well, I mean, you can take in a lot of things when you're watching a play. I mean, you can appreciate all kinds of stuff that's going on and stay with the narrative as it's happening. But yeah, the tea, I'm just remembering that. It's like I was aware of how much tea was in the cup and thinking, oh my God, is she not going to spill that? I mean, it looked like it was.
Well, I tipped my teacups just so you couldn't see what was in the cup, which was nothing.
Oh, really?
The two ladies had tea to drink, but my cups that I passed off had nothing in them. But I tilted them just upstage enough that you couldn't tell that. It was all very trickery. But I have to say, like, my mantra, I was mostly talking to Nora whenever I was on screen. Right. And so it was just like, don't look at anything else, just look right at the camera, and then trust. It was easy. It was easy for me because Brian had a very clear vision and Michele understood how he wanted to execute that. And so it was just like, look directly at the camera, unless you're talking to Torvald, then you look off this way. If you're talking to, look here, then there, and just follow the blocking and trust that Brian had a vision, and he did, and it worked. So it was actually easy.
That's not just any director be able to do that though. Yeah. That's a extra little thing you got there, Brian, going for you to be able to direct people that way. What about the normal sort of way of directing though? I mean, how much did you work relationships and objectives, or I mean, what was your approach as a director? Having these folks.
Can I jump in really quickly here, because
absolutely.
I've now worked with Brian in every single play that I've done in Lansing.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, actually, because I've been in Jekyll and Hyde, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and now this, and all of those have included Brian. So Jekyll and Hyde, obviously, we were in together, which is when we formed our friendship. But
there are other good people too.
There are other great people in Lansing. That take away from anyone else, but actually I can say working with Brian as a director was very similar to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I will say, in terms of how he directs. I actually talked about this in the WILX interview a little bit with Nicole. It didn't make it into that part because we talked about so much stuff with her, but I actually trust Brian implicitly when I am on stage or on screen in this case. He just has really, really good instincts. And my mom's a director and my dad's a music director. I come from a very long line of theater people in the Metro Detroit area. And I just think, especially for being Brian's age and everything, he's just like the best of the best out there. So the process was honestly like the same in terms of like the way he does the acting and the relationships and everything. And honestly, for how much could have been lost in terms of like the character work and everything, in terms of timing and the technical things we had to do, I don't think any of that suffered, which I think is pretty apparent with the feedback we've gotten from everyone at this point. So.
Well, Kate, I think you're right to identify trust as being the key thing there. I mean, for me, I realized that, when you're on stage, you want to be in the moment with the other person you're on stage with, and in the between that happens between you and the audience. I mean, you want to have both those relationships going, but how do you also manage that and stay, in your own head, or how does the third eye? And the third eye was always for me, if I had a director I trusted, it was the director. I would imagine the director there. And if for some reason one that a director wasn't in the audience even, it was hard for me because I couldn't see that. I knew they weren't watching me. So I appreciate that very much. And Brian, what would you say about how you directed it as opposed to how you would direct a play live?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think Kate hit the nail on the head. I approached it pretty much the same way, just with a slightly different order. When I direct live, I tend to start with blocking because as an actor, which I'm primarily an actor actually, and so I associate movement with memorization. And so to me, I would usually block first. In this case, for the first month of rehearsals, we weren't sure how we were going to end up performing it. And so I didn't want to block yet. So I spent the entire first month really working on characters, and sort of the pacing was very important to me. It always is as a director, make sure this thing doesn't drag, make sure people stay engaged and interested. And so we really focused on those aspects first, but it's really the same way that we would do it, just a slightly different order. And if I can add, the back end of that then I think is really important when we talk about trust. And not to just, I don't just want to sit here and gush, but I think it is also really, really important when you have a directing team that trusts one another. And so I love working with Michele for that very reason. Several things we share is that we're extremely precise, right? We know exactly what we want, especially once I can tell Michele, this is what I'm looking for. She is laser focused on making sure I get what I want. And she will notice things that I don't notice and vice versa. So having
Isn't that great? That is so great.
And that, that gives me that confidence that, if I'm missing something, any self-doubt that I have is erased by having her there. And then obviously having a cast that is stellar and that cares so much and is willing to put in just as much work as in fact, more work, because this is a little bit more difficult of a medium. So really, I think it in many ways comes down to the people and the relationships that you have. And this group was really wonderful to work with in so many ways.
I want to add to that, working on my play over the summer, Past the Ducks, I was developing the script. I was rewriting the script as we did it, obviously, workshopped it through the summer. And we had Marcus Fields as the assistant director. And he also, and I want to say this because I know it is so incredible to have somebody who sees stuff that nobody else sees, who looks at it as a writer as well as a director and an actor, and the effect of what you're doing on the audience. It's like so much that's in that guy's mind. And I suspect Michele has some of that same, and you're obviously able to communicate with each other well in doing that. Joe, I'm going to turn to you. I mean, I thought you were fantastic. The energy between you and Rachel, I think, I guess, I don't know if you're the major antagonist. It seemed like you were to me, but certainly the question of memorization. Isn't it hard to memorize when you don't have that repeated interaction live in the same space with the other actors?
So not for me, actually.
No? You're good. Okay.
Yeah, I just basically once I get something, I read, speak something enough times and it just sticks. And so
okay.
my process for memorization is the repetition.
You've got one of those minds that just gets the lights.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so so yeah, it was mostly just, I mean, it was really nice because I've got a castmate here, and so we would just be sitting on the couch in front of the TV and hit mute and run through a scene.
Yeah.
Go through her scene, go through my scene, and so it was, yeah, that was just
That's true. You did have that physical intimacy with somebody from the cast right there with you, which is helpful. Although
being able to go back and forth and having he could do the male parts of my scenes.
Yeah.
And he also enjoyed playing Nora a whole lot.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Rachel.
Yeah.
I don't know if you all know how much I adore this woman, but I got to do a show with her a year ago, Unnecessary Farce, and she was so amazing. And as I wrote today on the Facebook thing, I just you were mesmerizing, and it's so much complexity going on in your face. As Brian said, because we can see your face, I mean, that obviously is a nice advantage to being able to be sort of in a close-up all the time, but your movement also, and tell me about Nora. Just tell me how you went at Nora and how you got to know her and what your challenges were.
I loved her immediately. I mean, I have seen some scenes of A Doll's House in college. I studied theater, so it was kind of hard to escape knowing a little bit about A Doll's House, studying that in college. But when I hadn't spent a lot of time with the script, and I hadn't seen the whole thing, or even read the whole thing, I don't think. And so I remember during auditions, you go into every audition like this could be something or it could be nothing, so I'm not going to get attached to it. But I couldn't help but start to get really attached to her immediately. Every time I read for her, I was just like, oh my gosh, she is just so incredible, especially for the time in which she was written. And so I just started to fall in love with her immediately. And when I got casted and started reading the script more, I immediately started to compare her and her journey to a piece of pottery. and that it had like a single crack in it, and the crack just kind of grew throughout the show. So every time I had a moment of showing some sort of uncertainty or some sort of like shakiness in her reality, it was one of those cracks. So in my mind, I was just like, okay, where do I want to layer cracks in?
That's nice. That's nice.
And I think that's just the way my brain works, is kind of with those metaphors of like, okay, so I'm going to put like a visual image in my mind to kind of propel me through. So yeah, and it's so funny that you talk about, you know, my facial expressions and stuff, because I have not a very subtle face. I make very big facial expressions, which translates great on the stage, but on camera is sometimes kind of obnoxious. So I had to work really hard to like make sure that I was subtle enough.
That's right. That's right. You do have big expressions. That's right. I remember
that. A voice teacher once in college, I was singing a piece, and she goes, "Okay, so maybe don't make as big a facial expression because you don't really have a conversation like that." And I was like, "Well, how much have you talked to me? Because I do." Really big faces, and as you said, I mean, the last show we did was Unnecessary Farce, and those faces were great for that show. Like, played really well, but in a show like this, absolutely not. So, and then the fact that the audience is going to be so close in my personal space, I had to be really conscious of not overdoing anything. And even those moments where she was being a little more lighthearted, I wanted to make sure that she still had that depth of a person and didn't ever start to stray into kind of my jokey, you know, facial expressions and playing things up and stuff like that. So that was actually kind of a big challenge for me. So I'm glad that it came quite well.
Even more impressed now that I remember, you know, that the way that you were in Unnecessary Farce and the way I saw you. I mean, I know that's partly why I was so fascinated watching you, is because I just didn't think about that consciously. But it was so subtle and so much going on. And I mean, I think one of the complexities of that character is that she appears to be rather shallow, you know, to other folks, and yet you have to see just how the wheels are turning in her mind all the time about, well, how am I going to get out of this? And you say cracks, you know, and I think that's a nice image, but it's like your entire world is falling apart. And Ibsen makes that really clear. I mean, he writes the play so clearly toward that just widening chasm of how are you going to save yourself. And I want to ask you, I hope people don't mind that I'm focusing on Rachel a little bit. She is kind of the center of the play, and her performance is stunning. Rachel, when did, and I don't want to give away the play for people who haven't seen the show, because even I get confused with Hedda Gabler, and so I forget which ending is the one that you're going to have. So I don't want to reveal that, but you are on a track to try to save yourself. In an amazing sort of way, you sort of succeed in saving yourself, and yet you make a certain choice. When did, and I know this had to be so hard because you were performing it backward, as I understand. You didn't do it in consecutive order, even when you performed it for the camera. But when in her journey did she decide to do that? Decide to make that choice?
I think it was pretty late in her journey. I thought
so too, yeah.
Going with the cracks, I think there was foundation being laid as far as putting little bits of, maybe this relationship is not what I thought it was from the very beginning. I think there's interactions right at the top of the show that make her feel like, okay, that's weird, or not weird, but that makes me feel maybe less secure than I want to, or
sets you off balance.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's definitely a building of feelings, but it's really that last scene where I think it almost takes her by surprise, because she had a certain plan to stick to being what she considers a good woman. And she was going to follow through until right up at the end. And then she's all of a sudden like, no, I can be a good woman in a different way. And so, yeah, I think it is very late. It's right towards the end there where she really just, I think it even takes her by surprise.
I like that. I like that a lot, because that's what seemed, because I was after the fact, I couldn't replay it, obviously, even though I wanted to find out, to track that in the performance. And I think one thing that helped a lot, Jace, was that your sort of flabbergastedness at what she was doing represented all of society, you know, like you just sort of, you became this wall of oppression or whatever, and it's like, what? I mean, this is happening. So I just realized, I think, listening to Rachel talk, how important what you did there was to that scene. Can you talk about that a little bit, or just how you felt?
Yeah, you know, Torvald, it was, Brian and I had talked a lot about who is Torvald, what is his deal, and essentially by the end of our conversations, I realized that I kind of had to work backwards. I would literally have to start with the third act to really show who he is as a character, right? Because pretty much through the first and second act, you're getting, as you said, a wall. I mean, you're getting a shell of a person. There's not really a whole lot of emotion. Yeah, there's a little bit of charm there, but for the most part, I mean, he calls her Featherbrain and stuff like that. So there's little lines in there that kind of show the type of person he is, but it's really not until the third act that you really get that full-blown window into what's going on in Torvald's mind. So as I was developing the character, I literally had to go almost from the last page and work my way back to scene one. And it was actually my fault. The reason why we decided to record the third act first. And for me, it was because I had been working so hard on that character development there in the third act, because like I said, act 1 and 2, he's essentially just kind of this wall of a man. I mean, there's not a whole lot going on there. But in the third act is really where you kind of break down Torvald. And if it wasn't for Rachel's amazing, you know, acting, we probably wouldn't have, I mean, I don't think Torvald would have ever become even that good of a character, right, in the entire show, because it really is Torvald and Nora playing off of each other that really makes that third act pop. And so if it wasn't for Rachel, honestly, Torvald would probably just be the same shell of a man he was in act 1 and 2. So it really was, I mean, playing Torvald was a very interesting, especially in a 5x5 square, you know, that I was working in, was more difficult than it looked.
The way the power dynamic, see, this is what I believe in terms of like power. I've always, you know, power is an important word for me, but power over versus power to change. I mean, power to, like, the power of connection, which is what I think theater is about. And to watch Jace, to watch Torvald, who represents this kind of the oppressive norm, you know, what's going on, which a lot of everybody kind of represents, but you are most flatly representing that, whereas they're more conniving in what they want, I think, or in some way.
Well, one thing that was interesting is Brian mentioned, because originally when I started playing Torvald, especially through acts 1 and 2, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this guy's a dick. You know what I mean? So like, I have to play him that way.
Obviously. Yeah, that's hard. Yeah.
But then he explains it to me and he says, look, back in this period, that's just, I mean, that was the norm. Like, he was still considered a good man.
Right.
So it's not like he's doing anything out of the ordinary. It just happened to be what we look at nowadays is like, well, what is this guy's deal? Why is he being like this? But it was normal back then.
Yeah.
And so you almost have to play it as a normal person for the first couple of acts before you get to the craziness there in act 3.
Could you get to a place where you loved him? Because I think that's really important, to try to love your character, or to find a way to love your character. I even loved George W. Bush when I played him. I couldn't believe I got there.
Yeah. No, there was, like I said, working backwards, there's a moment when that desperation, almost that lost child of Torvald comes out, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm not this strong willed man that's the manager of a bank. I'm very insecure.
Right.
And that insecurity doesn't really show until then. But yes, you kind of feel bad for him a little bit, of like, this is the way he was probably brought up, was to be like this. This was society in those days. And so in his mind, he didn't know he was doing anything wrong. It was just Nora that was smart enough to know that, she was ahead of her time, being like, look, this isn't okay,
Yeah.
And so you kind of do feel bad for him, of like, ooh.
Well, I don't feel bad for him, but I love how the power that you represent is so hollow. I mean, it's just the structure, and with a little flick of her mind and her finger, she subverts that whole thing by making a decision that cannot be made in this society. It's just that's not an option, and yet she does it, and it's all flipped just like that. I mean, I think Ibsen's so good at showing that. Joe, again, and Kate, and Bob, and Abbie, it felt to me, well, Abbie, you're sort of a special case, because I do want to know what you wanted. Okay, what you were trying to get, because that's a tough part. Probably less so for the nanny than with the maid, but you all wanted something, right, within it, and that's kind of the path you took and how you got there, and you sort of got your own little sinuous way to get what you want somehow. I mean, that's what it felt like to me, and that all that operates on Nora, to put her into the cracks, as she talks about. Just how your characters came together, is that fitting what I'm saying, or was it something different? How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I think that's really fitting. I think it's interesting. I have to say, I'm not putting myself in Krogstad's shoes. I mean, he basically he sees Christine Lind walking down the street in town and immediately jumps to the conclusion, like he formulates this idea, like, oh my God, she's a good friend of Nora's. She's, Nora knows that she's a widow, so Krogstad can know that she's a widow. So like he gets this, like he is going to be fired and Christine is going to take his place because they can't work together.
Right.
So and now he needs to do something, and so like he had this trump card that he was.
Right.
I don't know that he wanted to play it, but he definitely wasn't afraid to play it.
Yeah.
To make sure, because what he wanted depended on that job.
Yeah. And if the play were about Krogstad, it's very similar to what she's going through. It's just that you're a man in this society, and you can get what you want by doing the things you do.
Yeah.
Scurrilous.
What's that?
Scurrilous.
Scurrilous. He's basically, he finds himself confined, but instead of because of like being born a woman, it's because he, made a crucial mistake in his past, and so. Right. But you're right. He innately has more power to fix it, right. and so he what drives the plot is him flexing that.
Right. And Kate, did you have any dark secrets underneath that we don't see, that what's driving out? I mean, you also had this placid face that all this stuff's going on behind it,
I don't think Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I don't think Christine had any dark secrets. We kind of talked about driving motivations of Christine. Brian, I remember distinctly Brian kind of saying at one rehearsal with Rachel and myself early on that Christine is definitely one of, if not used to be, if not still, was his favorite character in the show, just because he thinks, and he was like, gasp, but he thinks she's the strongest character in the show. Well,
she gets what she wants, and she gets there pretty easily. I mean,
right. And So I don't think she has any secrets or anything, but what I like about Christine, and she is a very hard character for me to play, and Brian knows this because like Rachel, I'm a very emotive person on stage, and we actually found out we've played a lot of like similar and the same characters. We're both Penny Pingletons and Hairspray characters, so we're both very emotive and like wow out there characters. But so I have trouble being the stoic, you know, emotionless, kind of cold type character. And so for me, this was a real challenge. And so definitely a switch for me, but I do think she's a very interesting character. I think she's very layered and calculating, not in a bad way. I think calculating in a way to where it serves her, and it serves her very well in a time where women were not able to do that very well because of what we were just talking about.
She doesn't have that thing in her that Nora has, which says this is not right.
Right. And she played the game. She used her feminism in a different way than Nora ultimately does, because Nora used it in a way where she ultimately said, this isn't right. She even says it in a line. She says something about women have sacrificed for thousands of years in a way that men have never had to. And Christine doesn't do that. Christine uses her feminism in a way where she plays the man's game. Right. She works in the bank. She takes Krogstad's job and says, I'm not going to give up your job for you because that wouldn't benefit you. Like, even though I do love you, I don't care. I'm going to take your job. So she plays the game and she's unapologetic for it. And I love that because like,
and that's, I do a lot of workshops on oppression and privilege and all that kind of stuff. And that is a strategy that happens a lot for groups that are oppressed, is that they play the system, and thereby it still goes, you're still the oppressed person, but you're finding a way to work within that, which is what Nora can't ultimately do. Bob, what is his name? Rank, right? Rank?
Dr. Rank, yeah.
Dr. Rank. Why is he there? What is his particular challenge to Nora?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously he's in love with her, and he lays that out pretty plainly in the second act. But it's interesting because Nora talks about this imaginary man to Christine, a rich old man that dies and leaves everything to her. And he's literally right in front of her.
Oh, right.
When he gives her the opportunity, he says, you could command me body and soul, tell me what you want. And she can't do it. And of course, I'd never asked her because it's not my business. It's not my character's business to know why Nora would then not say, can you give me a little bit of money? Can you give me But yeah, he would never take advantage of her. He would, I think he said it exactly as he meant it, that he would do whatever she wanted. If you want me to go away, I will. If you want me to give you anything you want, you name it. So it's interesting.
All the while facing his mortality. I mean, I think that's
he's dying. And so, he'd be the perfect guy to give her some money right now. He can't take it with him. I mean, probably already bought his coffin. I mean,
That's a fascinating character.
Yeah.
You asked that question, Doug, because Brian and I at one point actually talked about that way back when we were casting the show, because we already knew that Brian had some really strong feeling that he wanted to cut a lot of the show, the original script, to break it down for time, but also just because that's what he tends to do when he looks at a script and he finds pieces in it that he doesn't think serve. Like, we've already talked about that over here. Why are we doing it again here? Like, we've gone through that process together before. And so we considered cutting Rank out of the show altogether.
Wow.
And Brian asked me, he said, what do you think is his purpose? I'm not sure I know. And I said, well, for me, when I read it, I feel like it's another push on Nora, like showing Nora's, those almost like what Rachel said about the little cracks. It's like little cracks in her morality. Yeah. So when she sneaks the macaroons, that's one little crack. when she admits that she borrowed money and lied about it, she signed the bond in her dad's name. She had good reasons for it, but she still did it knowing it was illegal or wrong.
Right.
And Dr. Rank, I think, represents just one more push in another area of her life that is almost wrong, to see what she's going to do.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, you're just enriching. I'm glad we're doing this, because I think anybody watching this after they see the play would get a lot out of this. Abbie, so you've got that thing of having those small parts that don't really exist in plays, right? Because there are no small parts. What we really know there are.
Diminutive acting.
How did you approach this? How did you?
So I was Helen the maid,
right.
And that actually was easy because Nora says right in the script that when she lived with her father, she enjoyed hanging out with the help, and how they sort of talked about whatever and let their guard down and knew all the hot gossip and whatever. And so I think Helen and Nora have that relationship, and so Helen maintains that. I think she's also partly looking out for Nora because she sees everything going on in the house and knows the situations, you know, and just also, you know, wants the, like Kate was always saying, she does more than serve the tea, you know, she's always pouring the tea, spilling the tea. She knows she has all the tea. She sees everything going on in the house, and she does. And then Anne, as the nursemaid, like she raised Nora. She was Nora's mother figure. Right. And so having Nora's love and trust is everything to her, because that keeps her employed and keeps her going.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good job. Rachel, you turned your mic back on like about 10 minutes ago, and I thought you wanted to say something, but I didn't want to stop anybody else. So what can you remember what you were thinking at that time?
Oh, well, I have two thoughts that kind of go together. And they are that it was really important for me that Nora loves Torvald, even though it was really hard for me as a person to love Torvald.
Okay.
So you were talking with Jace about if he loved Torvald, but it was really important for me to love Torvald, Nora to love Torvald, even up until the end of the show. And I think that can really make the end of the show very powerful, because we all have had relationships that have ended for one reason or another. And I think it is really painful. Even if it's a relationship that is bad, it can still be really painful because there's still always that like love and affection for somebody else. Exactly. And so it was really important for me to carry that all the way through the show. But then we were talking about Dr. Rank, and I think that Nora truly also loves Dr. Rank. So we were talking about like cracks in morality and things like that. Michele was talking about it, but for me, it was adding another layer of Nora does love him. And I don't know,
romantically or just fraternally?
I think there could be some inclination there, but she talks about how, you know, there's those that one loves best, and then there are those that one would almost always rather have as companions. And Dr. Rank is definitely that companion figure, somebody that she actually knows she can be herself with. Right. So it's a different kind of love, but it could still be misconstrued as romantic. And I think that in the end, when they have their final interaction together, that was really supposed to be that vulnerable, almost romantic on Nora's end type of goodbye. It was really deep for her. And so I think it's Dr. Rank, I can't even believe hearing it now that they were considering cutting him out altogether, because I think he was so crucial to the character that I built, at least, and the Nora that I knew. Because he was very much a way to show that Nora was not fully herself with Torvald, and that she loved Torvald, but Torvald didn't love her fully because he didn't know her fully. And so those were my thoughts.
Sure. And you could do it. You could pull Joey out of Friends, you know, and it would still be an interesting show, but you would lose all that stuff that's so interesting, you know. So
and that's actually a really fun exercise. We don't do it with most shows that are licensed because you can't, right? I can't do that according to our license agreement. But one of the benefits of public domain shows is you can undergo that exercise and say, I don't want anything to exist in this show that does not have meaning. And so if I'm hesitant to cut it, that means it has meaning. And you need to kind of divine and figure out what that meaning is. And I actually think even with a show where you can't cut out a character, I still, or a scene or a plot point or whatever, I don't know if you're familiar with competitive forensics, Stoke, but Jane Fallion used to be all into it, and I did it for a very long time in high school. And so we'd take a full show and we'd cut it down to 7 minutes. And so I'm very accustomed to just axing entire characters, entire scenes. You boil it down to as quick and to the point as you possibly can. And obviously we're doing a much longer show here, but still, I don't want to make this a 3-hour show for a bunch of reasons, but it's mostly because I want to distill it down to where everybody gets the point. Everything that's there needs to be there. And that's really important to me as a director. So it's a really fun and I think really important exercise for actors as well, in addition to directors. Like, why is my character here?
I've only directed once, but I get what you're saying from what Mary Jobe taught me in the class I took with her. I mean, that boiling it down to the essence is so important, and it's so hard. I mean, directors have to do that. Actors don't. They have to kind of do it for their own character, but to get the whole structure of the play together like that is really important. Okay, Amanda, unmute yourself.
Nope.
Fantastic. How did you do that? Just tell me about the really, in this particular setting, because of the way Brian set it up and the whole sort of surround sound kind of thing that was going on there, those costumes were huge toward making it be in the period it was and putting us in the place that we were in. What kind of stuff did you have to think about to put this together?
It's a little bit different than doing it on stage, as is everything. Because I did more detailed stuff. I added, things that wouldn't normally be seen and noticed on stage. Like, her little cameo or the choker, things like that from, far away, you're never going to notice. But in a more intimate setup like this, where there's going to be close-ups of these characters, they needed to be there because they would have been there in that time period.
Mm-hmm.
And also because there was no quick changes in the fact that they could stop taping and people could change things. And there was, I might not have added extra things because that's more stuff for them to deal with when they're doing a quick change, but that wasn't an issue with this. So I had more freedom to play with that kind of stuff and go, oh, we could add this, or oh, we could do that. So that was helpful. I know Abbie had a few things that we made her outfit a little, she had one solid piece and we just changed all the accessories.
Oh, okay.
Because she did have the quickest change of the show. And so we kept her in one solid garment and just changed the stuff around it and on top of it to change the look of it.
Where were you? Were you actually participating in some of this as it was being filmed, or
no?
Okay.
This was entirely done from afar.
Okay. Well, I have to say,
very interesting.
Yeah, but given the format, you do see the costumes much more than I do. Someone who doesn't look at costumes, closely. It's just not where my head is. But I was very aware of them in this show. Because they made so much of the reality there. That's articulate. Anyway, great job though, Amanda.
Thank you. It was an interesting thing to do because I didn't get to take measurements. I had to ask them what size do you wear in contemporary clothing, and hope that they were honest and hope that they knew. And so it was having to rely, and they were all awesome. They were awesome. Yeah. And really a lot harder with a cast that wasn't honest or was like, I'm kind of a medium when they're extra large, they were all really helpful. And that was great because the fitting I was prepared for, a mini train wreck, and it went really, really well. So I was really happy.
And as with every aspect of this, you had to do things differently. You had to find a way to do things in a different way. Matt, hi there. So they handed off to you 18 or so chunks of stuff. that with instruction. I mean, was this like building a little model in your house, or with the editing software, or what? How did you?
I came to this program today to listen, and I've just been delighted to hear all the stories about creativity, because
I know, yeah.
I approached this a little differently. I tried to take myself out of the creative process. Brian had a vision. Michele knew what that vision was. So I didn't make a lot of decisions about, for example, which take to use. Brian told me, these are the takes we want to use.
Yeah.
I would put those takes together and I would send them out an act at a time. Here, Brian, here, Michele, what do you think? And then they would come back with, well, can you fix this here? And can you change that there?
That sounds
and
familiar.
I would fix this here and I would change that there. And I would send it back out to them. What do you think now? Tell me. I just took orders when I put it together. I did not make creative decisions at all. And I just let Brian's process do it.
Okay. So what gratification did you get from doing this?
The fact that afterwards people gave me credit for making creative decisions.
Well, we all know you're very humble.
Yes, of course. No, it was an interesting thing for me to do. I mean, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of interesting projects now. Say, for example, your project, Past the Ducks, I was making creative decisions.
Right.
About when to change camera shots and when to do this and when to do that.
Right.
And I've done some things at my work at Okemos High School where I've been called upon to make some creative decisions.
Well, yeah, and it was all in your hands. We didn't actually see any of the footage.
That's right.
You put it together. Right. Yeah.
So for this process, I was there for most of the recordings. I got to marvel at the sensational performances of everyone. And I mean, literally took my breath away at times.
Yeah, me too.
And then I just went to work.
Yeah.
And Dope, you're right. Of course, he is being humble. As always.
I know.
He also provided the sound effects, and of course, we told him what we needed, but he just showed up with sound effects, and we never asked him to change those. They were perfect, of course. And that is definitely part of his creativity, because I've worked.
Let me tell you a sound effect story. And I'm going to make an admission. Brian has not heard this yet.
Okay, good.
When Michele originally approached me, and they approached me way early in the process, even though I joined it very, very late, I told Michele that I viscerally dislike A Doll's House. I just do not like the play.
Nice. Okay.
Don't tell Brian. I adore you. I'm going to do it, but I just don't like A Doll's House at all.
It's not your kind of play.
It's not my kind of play.
Yeah.
And then Michele gave me a list of sound effects, and I looked through them and I noticed that there was no gunshot. And at that point, I realized I've been thinking about Hedda Gabler all the time. I actually love A Doll's House.
That's wonderful. I love that. I know, and that's what I was alluding to earlier too. I mean, because I was watching, I was like, which one is this? Rachel, Brian, anything that's on your mind to say about this before we move into the final sort of phase of this conversation?
I guess the one thing I want to say that it might be something that you get us to say at the end, but I really believe that theater is iterative in a lot of different ways. And so one of the things that I hope about the unique choices that we made for this production is that people who see it and who appreciate it can take what they like and then use their creativity to come up with other things to add to the process. I mean, I think, one of the things that's so great about this program that you're putting together right now is that it really is about a theater community. Like, we are a little family in this show, and we're part of the Riverwalk Theatre family, but Riverwalk Theatre is part of the Lansing Theatre family. And with the, the virtual nature of this, it's even part of just the cohort of theaters across the country and the world. So as each of us come up with new things and new ways to do this, and we're all desperate to get back in person, of course, but as we come up with new ways and new ideas for which to do these things, I hope that we see different iterations of using some of the things we've done here. And the next time I see a virtual show, I'm going to be so excited to see, oh, they kind of did that like us, but here's how they changed it and made it even better.
Yeah.
And so I'm so excited about that. And I know each and every one of us are probably going to have other projects that we sort of branch out and do after this, maybe together, maybe apart, but I hope that we each take something away from it. And definitely, I think it all comes down to people, and it comes down to, we've heard things like trust, we've heard things like, innovation, and I think in general, just having a cast where there really weren't problems. Everyone was just kind of nice and wonderful and willing to try something that, honestly, there were several times I told them, this is kind of crazy, you guys, but let's try it. And they did it, and it looked fantastic. So I really look forward to, I guess, the next iteration of this. And I also want to do a bit of a tip of the hat to the iterations that have happened before us, because if I hadn't seen, for instance, Curtainless Theater do the Oedipus cycle, if I hadn't seen that, I wouldn't even be thinking about how this might look. And so everything builds, and everything we can learn from one another. And I guess I just wanted to say that before we were done.
Well, I'm glad you did. I mean, you really were taking stuff out of my own head there, because why I'm so excited is this organism that is our theater community is alive. It's not dead, it's going, and that's so heartening. It gives me such hope, and I want to stay alive as long as I can, because I want to keep doing theater in Lansing in whatever role, acting or directing or whatever I can do, writing. It's just so much fun, and you've really you've not only demonstrated, but you've pushed us into a place of hope, I think, by doing this. Rachel, anything you want to say before we move into the end?
I think as an actor, my focus has mainly been the story. I'm so incredibly pleased with how much innovation has happened throughout the storytelling process and everything, but I didn't have as much of a hand in that. My hand was more in the story, and I am so happy that we can continue to build on a story that is as old as this, but is still so relevant. I think that that's my favorite part of theater, is the story, and is finding the point, the thing that we can take with us and allow to transform us, and holding up that mirror and figuring out what needs to change in each one of us. And so I think it has just been such a joy to be able to tell a story and figure out how it still applies in my life, how it still applies in the community overall. And it is, so applicable to me as a woman, but not just me as a woman. It's also applicable to so many other groups, oppressed groups and minorities and things like that, that this is still such an important thing to recognize, positions of power, and how we can start to dismantle them and change that, so that we can all be reasonable human beings. That's the line I always come back to, is Nora's line of, I believe before all else, I am a reasonable human being just as you are. And that's like, that to me is like the rallying cry of everyone, and is such a monumental point in the script to me. And it might be a line that nobody else even remembers, but to me, that's what I will carry with me forever, is that moment.
Well, yeah, I think you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You weren't supposed to be involved in all that other stuff that's going on around you, because you needed to anchor the show with that character. All right. So I'm going to give you an exit question. We've gone an hour right now. I said I was going to try to keep it to half an hour, and of course I didn't want to. And you're all so articulate, and it's fun. But as an exit question, I'd like you to think of a scale from 0 to 10 in terms of this thing that I think is so critical to theater, and I hope you do too, but it's joy. I mean, I come to theater to see it for the joy I get out of it. I do plays for the joy of being with other people and working for a defined period of time on something. The joy I get getting inside a script, the way Rachel's describing, and trying to figure out, through rehearsal, the relationships between everybody. I mean, that joy of that is what feels like got stolen from me a year ago. And we are pushing through it and doing it. So my question is, when you started 0 to 5 with 0 to 10, with 10 being, I am just through the moon in terms of the joy I feel. 5 would be, well, this is okay. I'm having a good enough time, but it's not all that exciting. I mean, it's like, I'm glad I'm doing it, but it's 0 would be, God, I hate these people, and I never want to have to work on this again. I just don't want to go think about it anymore. So at the point of time of like say a weekend, where was your joy level at that point, a week into the process? When you were facing performance, actually putting the performance together, and that wonderful period of rehearsal was over, and then now. So, I mean, if you could assign a number, and it can go up and down or whatever it does, but I'm just curious where your joy was in those three things. All of you go off for 1 minute, go off the screen for 1 minute, and then I'll call you all back and you can give me your answers, hopefully as efficiently as we can. Okay, this is, while they think about that, I want to keep doing these dialogues. I think they're fun. I think now we have a whole new focus to go, and I changed it to lights up because I think, oh, I just realized I put an apostrophe in there. Lights up, lights up. Yeah. I wasn't thinking that. I was actually thinking, you know, lights up, like it says in the stage directions at the beginning of a play. But I like it that way. Anyway, I think that house left, you know, meant we all had to leave the house, and we couldn't leave our houses. And lights up feels to me like it's starting to come back, and this show is part of it. I want to do, there's a few I want to do. I want to do like several dialogues on the whole Zoom thing, which we talked about tonight, but I want to get the director's perspective on trying to direct in Zoom, get other ideas in, get people who have done it or people who want to do it to talk about it. The acting perspective on that, the rehearsal process, the just all the different things and how you surmount them. Obviously, you heard a lot about that tonight too. And then the audience response to watching things on Zoom, watching boxes or not. I mean, you know, if we decide that, you know, Zoom isn't the thing, or there's other ways to go about it. I want to do, let's see, shoot, I should have written them all down. I was going to give you like a whole bunch of ideas I had for new dialogues in case somebody out there wanted to be part of one. I want to do one that's sort of about improv, about what's not on the page, when you do stuff that's not on the page. Anyway, there's a bunch. And also, because the trivia tournament was so much fun for me, and I hope for others, I want to do a thing. I'm going to actually start having some charades and my idea is to have like people from casts of shows, you know, at least 4 people from a cast or a cast and crew from a show in the past, 2 of them to go against each other in a version of charades that I've created, I think would work on Zoom. So stay tuned for all that stuff. And I hope you all pay attention to it and be part of it. Come back on, everybody. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm just going to randomly go through. I'm going to start with Amanda down there in the corner for me and for the audience. I don't know, you're probably all in different places on your own screens. But Amanda, where was your joy level doing this in this process?
My joy level when I was contacted was like a 10. I was so excited to make something. I have been making lots of masks and it was helpful, but it doesn't give me that creative outlet. Sure. And so I was absolutely ecstatic.
Yeah.
Going into the costume shop after a year, also a 10. I just was so excited to be able to be with those costumes again and play with them and layer them, and yes.
Yeah.
The only thing that would make all the way through was a 10 for me. The only thing I'd say is I'll create it to a 9 just because I wish I could have spent more time with actual physical people.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
That's it. Everything else, awesome.
Great answers. Great answers. Mr. Ottinger.
Mr. Bloss. I started out as a 3 because, again, I thought we were doing Hedda Gabler. In the end, I was up around an 8. Like Amanda, you know, what I do, well, for one thing, what I normally do, I haven't been able to do, which is a shame. I miss that desperately, having that unique thing that I provide to people. So my joy is in finding that I do have a role to play in these kinds of shows.
Right.
I do miss that I did not get to really interact with these terrific actors. I know Brian and Michele pretty well at this point, but I haven't gotten to know the actors, and I hope I get that chance sometime. But for me, the joy is in the service to the project, that I did have something that nobody else had that I could provide.
Right, right. I remember when I asked you to be part of mine, I couldn't even get to finish the sentence before you said yes, because you wanted so desperately to get back doing something. Let's see, Abbie, how about you?
I think it was progressive from like 3, 7, 10, because I started out not knowing everybody, and I didn't know the show very well, and I didn't know what exactly it was we were doing, but I was just along for the ride. But it was awesome because I don't think I would have been able to do this in real life. I have a young child. Being able to rehearse from home made things so much easier for me. And Riverwalk managed to do what other virtual productions have not managed to do, which is still create sort of this really close-knit cast crew family. And and opening night was still really fun, even though we weren't all partying together. And I'm really excited for whatever mega party is going to happen post-pandemic at Brian's house. He promised, and it's going to happen.
Cool.
It's recorded.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. And Abbie, you've been, I mean, I love how you are going around to every opportunity you seem to get. You've been doing theater. I know everything I know of. I mean, you're in the one we're doing at Evolve. That's also opening this weekend.
Mm-hmm. And I performed in the park with Ixion over the
I know.
summer.
I saw you. Yeah, that was great. Yeah. Let's go to Kate and Joe. Kate, how about you? Let's start with you.
Okay, so like a week in, I was at like a 10 because I was super happy. Unlike Matt, I love Hedda Kepler. It's like one of my faves from college.
I do too.
Yeah, I studied Ibsen and Chekhov in college when I was a theater major and everything, and loved them. So I was super happy.
His favorite is The Music Man, by the way. That's his favorite show, Music Man. So just so you know what we're talking about.
And I was at like, I'm gonna say like a 7, because I was like, why have I been doing theater this entire pandemic? Because we've done a bunch of curtainless stuff since then. I was pretty burned out like 3 months in, and Brian and I were doing a whole bunch of like media releases and like all this stuff, and like with Jace's help, like doing a whole bunch of media stuff at that point. And I was real tired and like just really stressed at work. And I was like, why am I doing this? And now I'm at like a 10 again. So yeah,
okay.
The typical lull of like recording and like tech week and everything. But yeah, we're back up.
Okay. And Joe?
So just getting started, I guess I would say I was about a 7 or an 8. Really happy to be doing something, like honored to be cast. Kate had always had great things to say about working with Brian, and so like I had gotten to know him and Michele. I had gotten to know them personally through Kate, but hadn't worked with them before, and so it was exciting. But there was still a little bit of that. I don't want to say apprehension, but like, okay, now I have to work, and now I have to figure out a character and memorize lines and stuff like that. When we were going into recording, I would say I was an 8, maybe pushing a 9. Like I was excited because I like I just get that. I still felt that energy of like, oh, this is happening and we're doing this, and being able, still a little nervous, but to get everything right. So yeah, and I'm definitely a 9, high 9 now, seeing what's happened, and the product that we're able to put together was pretty excellent.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, it was a great performance. Jace.
Yeah, getting the call that I was cast, I was like a 10. I honestly didn't know, moving here from another state, if I would even be able to do theater. It's really hard to kind of integrate into a new community, and to be able to, especially a new theater, to be able to get cast in a show. And it's been I haven't not been in a show, I think, for the last 2 years. And so to think that I wouldn't be able to be in one, broke my heart. So when I found out I was cast in this, I was so excited. then we kind of leveled off there when we were wondering what we were going to be doing, right? Are we going to be on the stage? Are we going to be doing virtual? And in my mind, I was thinking it's going to be a Zoom call, a Zoom call recorded of us trying to act. And it ended up with Brian's vision of like, no, this is what we're doing. It's all going to be recorded in separate scenes, and you know, you're going to have your own sets and everything else. It really shot it back up to a 10 of like, wow, this is way bigger than I thought it was going to be. And
I wouldn't have believed him. I wouldn't have believed him if he said that, I don't think, until I actually saw it happen.
When Kate says, I don't know what you're talking about, 100% my thought as well of like,
yeah.
So I do Zoom calls with people every single day, and it's going to be one giant Zoom call. So it was just really interesting to, when we were nearing the finished product and we were, you know, up against the grain of recording and just really seeing the form that this thing was taking. It was so exciting. Granted, it was probably the most lines I've ever had to memorize in my entire life, but which I can't complain. Rachel has all the rights for that. But yeah, just it shot right back up to a 10 of, man, this is theater again. I feel like I'm acting. I feel like I'm doing it here in a different state. I'm being able to be in another show. So I've just been elated, honestly, through the whole thing. So
thank you, Jace. Great words, Mr. Purosky. Bob, let's hear from you.
All right. When I got cast, I was probably a good 6 towards a 7 to say, okay, I'm going to do some theater again, which quickly probably diminished to a 4. So when I say, oh, I got to memorize lines again. Yeah, again, I wouldn't want to take anything away from Nora, but she's just a kid. I'm old. Old for this cast. Anyway, so what was the middle one? I can't even remember.
I think it was halfway through.
Month in or so, I would say. I got as we got closer to, you know, got off book and started really getting into the medium as we were going to do it. I was probably getting closer to 8 or 9 actually performing it. I probably could have used one more week of rehearsals to get the lines down perfect, but it was good enough, I think. And now I'm probably a good solid 9, just hearing all the praise from everybody and not having anything else to do and getting my evenings back. And
great. Michele?
Well, for me, starting it was before everyone who's spoken so far. And I would say starting a process, knowing I was going to get to start the process like this again with Brian, was really high, because again, we hadn't done it for a long time, and I think had both missed it. And about a week in, I would say I'm probably at about 6.5 to 7, because the cast was phenomenal and I was super excited about them. But this is actually the 3rd show I'd worked on virtually, and I was starting to lose some steam and want some of my nights back again and be like, oh, it's another rehearsal night. Okay. But again, once the rehearsal started, it went by so quickly and the cast was wonderful. Everybody was great. When we got to the point of recording, that's when I have the most work to do, probably, besides getting props and sets and that kind of thing. But so my anxiety takes over just a little bit, but I'm still super excited because I knew probably at least 3 weeks before everyone else who's spoken, just how good this was going to be. Because I understood at that point, not just how great they were, because I pretty much knew that at auditions, but I understood Brian's vision probably the best I had up to that point. And understood exactly like the tech of what, like done research and understood the tech I had to pull together with Matt and everybody else and how to make it look that way. And I started getting really excited again. So by the time we recorded, it was somewhere around an 8, I would say.
And how it all came together, and it came together. That had to be such a high, I would think.
Once we were done, I would say this week now, I'm at a 13, baby. Strike is done. Like, I am done. I just get to enjoy it now. It's so great.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you honestly really accept the fact that you've done something wonderful here? And I can tell you do. You realize that.
It's been a really good experience. Everybody on this whole call is just made it.
Yeah, Rachel, you are joy to me.
Thank you.
Tell me what you thought.
Well, I don't know if it's odd of me, but I love auditions personally. So I love reading with different actors and seeing how my performance changes based off of who I'm reading with. So like I spent several hours in auditions because I did the initial audition, and Michele and Brian both didn't know me at all. So they needed to see me read a decent amount to know if I was any good, which totally understood. But I originally read for Christine and for Nora. So I read a lot in the initial audition, and then I came to callbacks. And I mean, I was at callbacks however long they were, I was there the whole time.
Right.
So I read a lot, and it was so much fun. I just had such a blast. So I'd say like starting out, and then I got casted, which was like even better because I came in like, I'm not going to get casted. They don't know me. They, it's fine. That's kind of my perspective when I come into a new theater. And even though I've done one show, I was like, well, who knows if they saw it, who knows if they would remember or anything like that. So I'm just not going to expect anything. I'm just going to go to read, and it's going to be fun. And it was. And then I got the part, and it was even more fun. I was so excited. So I'd say I was very, very high on the excitement and joy levels when we started. And I feel like it continued for quite a bit, feeling very just joyful. And when Brian started adding blocking, it made it feel more like acting, even though I was still getting some of that with just reading, but adding in movement adds so much, and adding in props and things like that adds so much. But I would be similar to Kate, and when we got to taping, I was so tired. And I just think it's that this role was so large in so many ways. I mean, there were a lot of lines, but memorization comes quite easily to me, especially with repetition. And there was a lot of repetition. But acting backwards was really hard for me. And just a lot of little details that were difficult and made me feel like, I don't know if I'm doing a good job. And so I would like leave tapings and be like, I know what they're saying, but I just don't know. And so I didn't feel the greatest, although I very much enjoyed working with everybody, and still enjoyed, the costumes and everything about the acting process. But it was so different in so many ways. And the starting and stopping was also hard for me to be like, okay, I really liked the way that take was going, and now I know what's going in the garbage. So I mean, it didn't dip below a 7 or a 6, but it was very tiring and hard for me, definitely. And by the time we got to doing the first act, oh no, I can't even say that. I was going to say by the time we got to the first act, it was easier, but the first act actually was one of the ones where we took the most takes. And so it was pretty hard. And then I had to do the Tarantella after that. And the Tarantella was fun, but very physically exhausting. So I'm coming off of a week of being kind of like acting wise, emotionally kind of spent from how much I've put into the show. And then I had to do one last physical push of energy. And so that was tough, but was like something that was still fun to work with, still fun to participate in, and obviously an honor. But then I'd say at opening night, like Michele, just off the charts. It was so much fun to get to see the product, and mostly just to enjoy the product with the people that we worked on it with, because we didn't really get that much time to socialize. In a traditional show, you get some time in the green room. Even if I wouldn't have gotten that much time in the green room, I still would have gotten some time before rehearsals, after rehearsals, to get to talk a little bit. But when you're on a Zoom call, if something goes wrong, it's an audio thing. So you can't talk. you have to be completely silent. And so a lot of our bonding was done over, the Facebook page, or, here and there in some Facebook messages to each other and things like that. But then opening night, we really got to just kind of unbridled talk to each other.
Right.
That was really great. That was definitely a 10 or above.
Great. You make me so happy. I also, you reminded me, I wanted to ask about the Tarantella, but it's too bad. I don't want to dive into a whole new subject there, but I really thought you acted that well.
Thank you.
Yeah. I could tell a lot was going on there. I don't know who choreographed choreographed you or anything like that. I'm assuming you had a choreographer, but
Absolutely.
you were acting too, and it was really, really nice. Very, very good. I love you.
Thank you. Love you too, Doug.
So, Mr. Brian, you get the last word. How was it for
Last
you,
one, huh?
sir? Yeah.
So we're talking about joy, and my answer may surprise people. Probably doesn't surprise Michele because she gets pretty much unfiltered Brian in the way that the cast usually doesn't when I direct. So I come off as a very, very confident person, but I have a lot of self-doubt. I am a big thinker. I am innovative. I like to aim big, and I also know that if I crash and burn, it's going to be really big. Those of us who worked with me in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang remember I had this whole scene blocked, and we rented this $3,000 car from Toronto, and we had this, music box stage that moved the whole time and undulated, and it was wonderful. And then there was this one scene where I just looked at it, I think tech night, and I was like, guys, I have to reblock this. This looks terrible. You're all doing exactly what I told you to do, but it looks awful. And I think for me, there was some of that, even after we had recorded, there were moments that I was like, I don't know how this is going to look put together. And Matt and Michele both got texts from me that I'm like, guys, I'm concerned. Like, I love the basic building blocks of what we have, but it's like not being able to see it all together. I was like, did I fuck this up, right? People are counting on this. We have to release it. So I oscillated probably between a 10 and a 3 constantly throughout this process, because I'd have an idea. I'd be like, that's going to be so cool. I'd see them do it. The people were, a 10 the whole time. I loved working with all these people, but that level of self-doubt that I would kind of ping pong back and forth on definitely was challenging. But Michelle's able to talk me off the ledge, which is one of her other many, many skills. So I'm extremely proud, and I'm with Rachel and Michele, and I think everyone, that opening night social hour was just uninhibited joy. And that is what I missed more than anything else in this process, the ability to say we've created something awesome and we get to be together and be social and celebrate it. And I'm going to shoot up to a 15 when we have this party that I promised. So.
Well, I think that every great creator, has that self-doubt. I think that does not surprise me at all to hear that's going on there. But man, what an accomplishment. So happy for this. And the thing I got from hearing all you talk about where you were in this, it sounded like any theater project might be. It really sounded like the way we would go into anything like that. So we're back, baby, right? It's we're going forward. This has been so nice, and I'm going to stop the recording and then stay on the screen so we can talk a little bit after we stop the recording. But wave goodbye and thank you so much. And I hope you have more people than we can count come see your show this weekend, and also find time to come see Abbie and me in Standing on Ceremony at Evolve Theatrics, which is a different thing, but go to Evolve Theatrics and you can find out how to get there too. I love this community, and tonight was just another reason why. So bye, everybody.
Thank you, Doug.
Out there watching. We're gonna stop the recording.